Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina and I am the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up is a part of the Info Exchange Group. Info Exchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise that has delivered technology for social justice for over 25 years. With over 100 staff across Australia and New Zealand, we tackle the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Procurement Overview, More Than Just Buying, which will be presented by Kylie Damon from Damon Procurement. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you through there. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box and Kylie will answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you shortly after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. And that's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Kylie to get things started. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks so much for that. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kylie Damon, and I'm the Head of Procurement and Mentoring and Advisory Services at Damon Procurement. Thank you for making the time today, and I look forward to any questions you may have at the end of the webinar. So during this webinar, I'm going to give an overview of procurement and give you an idea that it's more than just buying. So where do we start? So to set the context, let's start with exactly what is procurement. And quite often, procurement is confused with purchasing. So procurement is acquiring the products and services that consider the entire supply chain. So it includes the planning, the standard specifications, any supplier research, value analysis, financing, negotiation, supply agreements, inventory control, and contract management. So it's the complete start to finish of engaging with a supplier. Purchasing, however, is really just the transactional process within that. And it really does just look at the financial aspects of the procurement process. It includes advertising tenders, perhaps reviewing quote submissions and awarding of contracts. So what we're looking at today is procurement and what most would consider as strategic procurement. And where this comes into play is generally where there's high value contracts or categories or high complexity. So there might be a high risk to the business. But if you're an organisation that doesn't have high spend and doesn't have high value to the market, where this becomes relevant is if you want to engage in some collaborative procurement. And so what collaborative procurement is multiple organisations all aligning their business need, engaging in a procurement and combining their requirements and their spend. And what this does is enable the even smaller organisations to access better solutions, innovation and value for money. So if so, this will give you an insight into what you should be aiming to achieve if you are working with a collaborative procurement specialist. So the outcomes that procurement really is set to do is to solve your business need. It's to access solutions for your business, access value for money, innovation, and alignment of your business values with your supply base, and with the intention of developing strategic supplier partnerships. Suppliers hopefully will be a part of your short-term and long-term future, so that's a really important aspect. So the extent to which an organisation may undertake any of these may vary depending on the value and complexity of the category you're looking at.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. There's just a bit of a rustling sound, like paper shuffling or something in the background, and it's kind of taking over the sound of your voice.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, my apologies. All right. Let's see if I can move that. There we go. Okay. So as I was saying, we'll just start the procurement process where it begins. And generally the contract review stage is flagged by either a contract expiry, perhaps poor, hopefully not, but poor performance of your current supplier. And however, the procurement is to ensure the best solution for your business. And so that includes a supplier that is sustainable to be able to meet your business needs, quality, delivery, and value. You may also have a change of business needs. So there are sectors currently undergoing what might feel like weekly changes to their landscape. And so being agile is important to remain relevant. And as mentioned before, procurement is to solve a business need. And if the need of the business is to be agile and innovative, then procurement is to provide access to this through the supply base. So to give you an overview of the process to enable this, we look at these 5 key areas. So market analysis, stakeholder engagement, strategy development, tender and evaluation, and recommendation. And 2 really important ones of this is all in the planning, and that's market analysis and stakeholder engagement. So if we look at the market analysis, where do we begin? We start by reviewing the market, and to do that, we start reviewing known and new providers. So it might be providers that you currently use, and it might be providers that you know that your peers in the market also use. And we want to build a context for our business needs. We want to understand how big is our organisation relative to these providers. How important is our business going to be to them? And we basically look in reviewing the market or reviewing these providers, we look at 3 main areas: company information, industry specific, and market information. So we start looking at the company in a lot of close detail. And we basically interview the providers to understand their turnover, what their staff trends are like, what they perceive their competitive advantage is, and many more other things to really get a picture of what this company looks like at its core. Speaking then with providers, we understand for them from their point of view, industry-specific information. So what is their core business? How do they manage their performance? And what is their perceived market value? So where do they see themselves sitting in the market? Are they the largest provider, the smallest provider? And where do they see themselves moving to in the future? All of this information is really, really valuable, and you'll see even more so when we get to the negotiation stage. The market information looks at things like cost drivers, the average profit margin for the market, and market innovations. And this gives a picture of just the sectors that we're buying into, what risk could be, which is derived from the cost drivers that we should mitigate and plan for, what the profit margin is, gives us an idea of perhaps any negotiation leverage or space that we might have, and then market innovations really tells us how the market's moving. Our suppliers' ability to innovate and access those market innovations is going to enable us to be innovative. So that's a really important thing. The next thing is stakeholder engagement. So stakeholder engagement is really, really vital. It's getting everybody involved that touches the product or service in the room to understand the need. And the key thing is to first identify the stakeholder. And as I said before, the stakeholder is anyone who engages the supply or delivery of the products or services. So this may initially appear to be a very, very long list. From the person who orders, makes the phone call to order, to the person who receives the product or service, to the person who then undertakes it, uses it, and then the person who invoices. So it is a very long list to begin with. The key is to establish a key stakeholder group which will represent each aspect of that supply, delivery, and utilisation of the product and service. So for example, a nurse may apply medical creams, however, the incoming goods receipt person accepts them on delivery and the store person orders them. So each of these are defined as stakeholders. So once you've established the stakeholder group, it's really important then to, the purpose of that group is to establish the needs specification. What's really important about facilitating the engagement with the stakeholders is to drive out exactly what the challenges and needs are of the group. And these reflect what the challenges and needs are of the business. So once you've established the challenges and needs of the business, you can then establish what the product or service needed is going to look like. During the case study later, you'll understand clearer what I mean when I talk about the stakeholder engagement and what we're wanting to achieve. What's also important is that with the stakeholders engagement, establishing what the business needs are is to keep in mind that they're aligned to the business values and hopefully aligned with the business 5-year plan. So that's the stakeholder needs specification. So what we go through is the stakeholder engagement, the evaluation plan, and then the risk management plan. I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. So as I said before, the key objectives are to establish the specification of the services. And so with the stakeholder group, we'll establish exactly what the service deliverables are, what the performance expectations might be, what quality regulations are required to be met, and anything else that determines what that product or service has to look like in its delivery and receipt. Once we've established exactly what the needs are, we then break that down a little bit further and we identify the priority of those needs. So what's the most important thing about these aspects? Is it pricing, quality? Is it important that the supplier has an aligning culture? Is their ability to report on what they've delivered? So all of these needs are established. And the outcome of the stakeholder engagement will establish the specification, which will feed into the tender documentation later. Further to that, we then establish the evaluation plan. So we have our stakeholder group. Of that group, we establish panel members for the evaluation plan. And then these panel members will be part of the evaluation team once tenders are submitted. We identify what the timeline looks like and the evaluation process. Who receives the tender submissions? When are they opened? How are they assessed? Who assesses which part of them? And so on. And also, what becomes really clear at the beginning is the value for money and how that's established. So, from stakeholder needs, establish what is mandatory and what is desired. Now, mandatory requirements are requirements that a supplier must meet that an organisation cannot compromise on. That might include insurances, it might include certifications, it might include qualifications of staff and things like this. What is desired refers to the needs that have some flexibility around them. So the desired criteria is what is used to evaluate the tender submissions. From there, we undertake a needs analysis. Now, the needs analysis establishes the weightings for each criteria. And this will actually quantify or assist in quantifying what the business values most and assist that when an evaluation happens and we arrive at our value for money, we are in fact comparing apples for apples. And that's a really important thing. Along this process, we also identify a risk plan, and that identifies the high risks that should be monitored throughout the process. Now, a lot of these risks can be established from the market analysis. So when we're asking what are the cost drivers or what are the perceived risks even that we ask of that supplier base, these can be mitigated or monitored during this stage. Okay, so an example of desired criteria might be innovation, delivery, and quality. And in this example, we've got 20%, 10%, and 70%. So of these criteria, this is how they're going to weight. So what's most important is quality, and what's least important, although still important, is delivery. To give you an idea of what a needs analysis tool looks like and how this might work. So it's important for procurement with their stakeholders to then facilitate through what the needs are of the procurement category, and then prioritize each one against the other. So what you can see here is reporting and skills. And what this shows is that skills is more important than reporting. And then capability, as a 0, is more important than reporting. And as you facilitate the workshop, or as you facilitate the stakeholder group going through the needs analysis, you're then able to identify what is the priority and be able to prioritise the needs accordingly. These then translate into weightings. So in this example here, you can see that performance is the highest priority for this procurement. And new technology is the lowest. So at this stage, we've conducted our market analysis. We've seen what type of market it looks like, what key suppliers exist, how many there are, how big they are. We've established stakeholder engagement, so we know what our organisational values are and what our business needs are. We know what's more important than the other in terms of our needs. And so with these two, we are equipped to then develop the procurement strategy. And so we can identify what is the best strategy to enter the market. Now, from our market analysis, we've identified that there really are only 3 players in the market, and there really is only one who can deliver everything we need. Then the most suitable option would be to simply do a direct negotiation and just have a conversation with that one supplier. However, if you can see that the market is very competitive and that there is an even balance, to say, across multiple suppliers, then a selected or open tender might be more suitable. This will also determine the tender period. So how long you keep a tender open for is determined by its complexity. So you might start at 4 weeks and extend depending on how much information you're wanting to ask of them so that you can evaluate, and how much work the suppliers will need to go through in order to provide that information. Now that's a really open conversation to have during the market analysis as well. So we've determined at this point our procurement strategy and how we're going to enter the market. So from here, we then produce our tender documents. And this might include a tender outline. So the date it opens, the date it closes, what format we want documents to be submitted in. The supplier profile, which gives the supplier the opportunity to give details about their business, their ABN, their licenses, their insurances, etc. We want to be very open and upfront about our terms and conditions, so what our payment terms might be or what our engagement terms are. And the tender submission is really outlined around questions that we would ask to ensure that the supplier is given every opportunity to meet our business need. So in this case, if we have a need for innovation, we are asking a question around, provide examples of your previous innovations or what you perceive as new innovations, or give us an innovation based on what our requirements are. The objectives of this tender process really are to ensure probity. And probity is about a fair and equal process, making sure that every supplier has the same opportunity as the next. What we want to avoid is giving one supplier an unfair advantage, only to find later, post-awarding the tender, that a different supplier is far more suitable. So we want to get this all clear right through the process. We want to make sure that suppliers have the opportunity for questions Ensuring that they have clarity on what the information they're meant to provide, and any questions around the specifications is really, really important. And along with that, that any questions that are raised are also communicated to the other suppliers during the process. Again, this is really, really important to ensure that you're able to compare apples to apples, and every submission is submitted under the same conditions. So once we've received the submissions, we then go to the evaluation. Now, fortunately, we've done our upfront planning and we're able to follow our evaluation plan. So we know what criteria we're going to evaluate them on, and we know what weighting we're going to give them. And generally how an evaluation might work is your evaluation panel, well, your procurement department will receive the tender submissions, and after assessing them for the mandatory criteria, because the mandatory is needed in order to continue, the evaluation panel then reviews the submissions that are remaining from the mandatory selection. Now, should all your submissions not meet the mandatory requirement, that does not mean your tender is now default. It means that you need to go back and communicate with your providers and ensure that they understand exactly what was mandatory and have the conversation they understand what they need to meet and that they can. So the evaluation panel then reviews the remaining submissions. So the desired criteria against the scoring. And so what happens, each member of the evaluation panel will review each criteria for each submission and then give it a score. And generally that's a score out of 10. Depending on the criteria and the scale of detail in each of those criteria, you might want to make it out of 5, but generally it's out of 10. So as we can see in this example, we've got innovation, delivery and quality. So submission from supplier A scored an 8, 4 and 6, and submission from supplier B scored a 4, 3 and 10. So what's really valuable about these having weightings is that we can then develop a consistent score for each of those based on what they've delivered using the weightings. And that enables us to compare apples for apples. So as you can see here, this, like as I said before, it enables an equal comparison between the suppliers and balances, when we look at the value for money, this balances the pricing with the deliverables. So as you can see here, we've got innovation, which has a weighting of 20%. Supplier submission A scored an 8, so their weighted score for innovation is 1.6. And as you go through this process and create the total weighted score for each provider, you're then able to establish each supplier submission value for money. And as you can see at the bottom, that's the total cost, so the total pricing submission divided by their total weighted score. And what that provides is then a score that you're able to compare across multiple suppliers. Again, ensuring that you're comparing apples for apples. Okay, so now the fun part. So once we've established what the rating of each supplier submission, and we're able to rank them. So if you've got 8 submissions, you might shortlist the top 3, the top 2, or maybe even the top 4, depending on what the ratings look like. You then are able to go back to all the information that you gathered right at the beginning to set up the foundation for the negotiation with those top 3 suppliers. So utilising market information that you establish, so you know the size that suppliers are in the market. You should have established perhaps what the supplier's general profit margin might be, what innovations you should expect from one supplier that you've seen in another. So using the market information, you've already identified what your business needs are and what's most important to you. So handle with that, and then the supplier submissions, you're able to negotiate a really favourable outcome. And the intention is to find a strategic partner in your supplier, someone who value adds to the organisation beyond pricing. And that comes out with your stakeholder needs, because engaging with the supplier is not just about pricing. And obtain a favourable outcome for both parties. If we were just about the price and all we wanted to see was the lowest price, then what we might find is a supplier who's happy to provide products and services at cost. And while that might give an organisation benefit in the short term, that's not sustainable for the supplier in the long term. Not only that, it doesn't actually give that supplier any incentive to bring forth value add and innovation, things that might make your organisation's use of those product services easier and more efficient, saving internal costs in the long run. So it's really important to look at the negotiated outcome holistically, not just as a price, and hence we have value for money. Now, because of all the hard work that's been done at the beginning and along the way, bringing the recommendation forward is really quite straightforward, as what it does is it really brings the story together. And it presents the market analysis, your business needs, the submissions and evaluations, and the negotiations undertaken, which leads to a really clear and concise outcome. That's the intention. So with that recommendation, that brings a lot of benefits, both to being able to demonstrate integrity in the recommendation that's provided, but also it enables decision makers higher up the delegation ladder to be able to approve much more efficiently. And so from there, I'll just go into a case study of a tender that, or of a client that we worked with recently. And this will give really a working example of what we've just been through. So I've got a case study here of medical consumables. Now, medical consumables are creams and products that assist in the care of people who are injured or might become injured. Okay. So this case study is about a large organisation. To give you the context, it was a large organisation. They had been using the same provider for over 15 years and felt that they had a good relationship, felt that there was some loyalty. This was the language always used in the review meetings. They had not competitively tendered for this category. And once engaging with the stakeholders, what was discovered was there was actually some issues that have been ongoing for several years. And what they found is that the supplier potentially had grown quite complacent. And so there was very little value add or innovation to the business over this 15-year period. So this gave a great background to be able to undertake this procurement process. So the first thing we did is we looked at the market. And what we found is that there was really only 3 main providers in the market. And in essence, they all provided the same service. They delivered medical consumables. However, as we reviewed the suppliers more closely, what was clear was that other organisations had a greater focus on innovation and also had a greater alignment to the business culture. So this really indicated that perhaps there were better options than what we were currently using. Stakeholder engagement then happened, and it was a really positive engagement with the stakeholders. They were very excited to be a part of the process up front. I think there's nothing worse for an organisation, and it gives procurement a really bad name, when procurement have gone and changed out a supplier, unbeknown to anyone else, until the new products or services have turned up. So the engagement of stakeholders at this stage of the process certainly lifted the profile of procurement in the organisation. And there was a lot of enthusiasm to be a part of it. So 2 stakeholders were identified to represent the business needs. Now, although there are only 2 providers, obviously 2 stakeholders, there was a lot more stakeholders in the process. So these 2 stakeholders were identified to represent the business needs. And in doing that, they would then communicate with their group of stakeholders in order to be able to represent them. So that's to be really clear. That provides some efficiency in being able to establish what the needs are and the weightings, because instead of a room of 20, you have a room of 2. They were able to provide really clear and really definitive input on the challenges that they were currently experiencing. So some of these challenges looked like price changes were happening unapproved, and they were unaware of the price changes happening. It was only by chance that they were becoming aware of these price changes. They were having issues with their own internal stock changes, stock rotation. So they might order a set of creams and then find in 6 months the creams were out of date. And so these were some challenges they were having internally. We're coming from the stakeholder perspective, remember? And they also had some issues with the delivery of the products. So they would find that products might arrive, and they might even arrive at the same time or irregular times, but they were finding that their staff were having to unpack that. Now, if you're an organisation that needs medical consumables, chances are your staff are going to be needing to care for people, and the last thing that they should be doing is probably unpacking the boxes for the products. So they were able to provide a really clear input on what was valuable in those areas. And some of the things that came up were product consolidation. They had well over 800 different products that they knew was far too many for what they were doing. Product delivery and storage, that became clear just with the idea that staff were unpacking products. And they wanted to focus on products that actually supported their needs. So if they were unable to visit a client and apply medications, they wanted medications that were going to be able to make the time that they weren't going to be available. So it needed to be specific to the needs and functions that they were doing. So this was really great from the stakeholder engagement. We were able to establish that. So from this, we established the evaluation panel, which was our 2 business area stakeholders. We had 1 procurement specialist and a procurement member as the chairperson of the evaluation panel. And they really just oversaw and facilitated that the evaluation process was undertaken correctly. Now for this particular project, they were able to establish what their needs were. And as you saw in that earlier example, performance was the highest need. Now, this here is listed in order of importance, but even still, some are far more important than others. So performance and innovation were actually listed at the same rate when it came, at the same weighting when it came through. So performance and innovation were most important. Then we have skills. Pricing and payment doesn't refer to the price of the products. It refers to the pricing stability. So are they able to fix pricing long term? Or and also payment terms. Are they able to meet the required payment terms? Or are their payment terms in alignment with our business? At times, there's required flexibility around both of those items for this client, so it was really important that was a feature. Now, even though reporting was the least priority and weighted the least, it's still a requirement of the tender, so it's still very important. So by this stage, we've established the needs, we have our evaluation panel, we've done all of our background work, and we're undertaking the tender. So the tender, we received 3 submissions from the 3 main players in the market. 2 submissions were shortlisted from the mandatory criteria. And so there were 2 submissions which were evaluated according to the needs. And from that, supplier A scored 156 in a value for money, and submission B from supplier B scored 170. And what you find is the lowest number is actually the preferred option or preferred submission at this stage. And what this did was give us the foundation to then go on to the negotiation. And what we discovered in this was that whilst the tender submission was able to provide a lot of important information for us to evaluate, continuing on a discussion of negotiation with both of these providers along each of the needs that we valued, and also with a consideration of the market analysis, we were able to negotiate the following out of it. So the negotiation enabled a pricing review, additional value add. So one submission had greater capabilities within their organisation to provide product consolidation. They were able to provide much more organised vendor managed inventory, and they were able to provide training and support from their own internal staff. Now, in return, they were able to undertake further review such that we could add additional products. So it would in fact increase the spend that we would have with them, or the volume of spend that we would have with them. So going through that negotiation, we did achieve a better price, but importantly, we achieved value add. So even if cost drivers in the market might drive up the price, we've still been able to add value to both our organisation, our engagement with the supplier. And what this meant was that revising our value for money resulted in supplier A having a score of 162 and supplier B a score of 144. So negotiation is a really important part of this process. And understanding, to reiterate again, that the negotiation is possible because of the market analysis that we undertook and the deep dive into the stakeholder engagement that we undertook. So without those lots of information, we would have been very hard pressed to be able to negotiate real value out of the submissions outside of just pricing. So when we got to the recommendation stage, although it wasn't really directly straightforward because there was so much value add, we were able to provide a recommendation that had stakeholders were already engaged with and thereby are a part of the recommendation. Had clear background on the considerations that we undertook throughout the process. So the needs and the business values were all considered within it. We had clear objectives and quantifiable benefits. So we were able to put a value, a quantifiable value on the value add. What this meant was that approval was able to happen in a shorter time frame, and we've put greater confidence into the decision making. For this specific case study, the contract value was 5.12 million over a period of 5 years. And the outcomes achieved, including value add and savings across the 5 years, was 1.6 million. So needless to say, it was well and truly a worthy exercise for the organisation to go through that process. And really, really valuable. Okay, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Kylie. We haven't had any questions come through, so was there anything you wanted to add?
No, the only thing I would add is really just to reiterate what I've gone through, and that in order to achieve
achieve procurement objectives for an organisation, it's really important to go beyond just pricing and really look at your market and, importantly, what your business needs are. So that's all I would say.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Kylie, for presenting today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from the presentation. If you do have any questions that come to mind later or any feedback at all, please send that through to events@connectingup.org, and we'll be able to answer those questions offline. Don't forget that the recording will be available on the website very shortly, and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everyone.